Okay, well, thank you so much for that warm introduction, and thank you to all of you for joining us today, our fifth anniversary of Angeles Investors. And of course, it's my honor to have this fireside chat with Francis, who is a well-recognized senior level C-suite executive in the some of the most powerful financial brands in the world, not even in the United States, um, because I think that she brings the opportunity for us to hear lessons of her path that, as many of you in various fields might find of interest. So I want to start, they don't give us so much time. I want to start, Francis, by if you could just give us a snapshot of your background and the education, the family ties, the essential elements that got you here.
Okay, 35 years and 35 seconds. Let's go. All right. So first of all, delighted to be here. Good afternoon. Fascinating conversation right before this panel. I said, wow, we're going to shake up this conversation quite a bit. It is a completely different path. So story starts born and raised in Miami, Cuban parents, immigrants, early 60s. And I went to school locally at FIU, where I have later had the opportunity to be a board of trustee and stay very engaged with the university. My first job, I studied at FIU, finance, international business. And my first job at a college was at Barnett Bank, for those of you who were around in those days. It is now Bank of America. And I was in banking for about 4 years, where when I thought to myself, there has to be a bit more out there that I can engage in. And I say that because while I had a fantastic experience in banking through a management training program, largely in the credit and risk management side, when I found myself sitting in commercial lending and cold calling, I thought, don't think I want to do that. And I didn't think it was for me. Um, and so I had always been very inspired by my father, who was an entrepreneur and had his export business primarily to Latin America. And part of my undergrad and my MBA was very focused on international business.
Mm.
And I have to tell you, they were my favorite courses. They were my favorite classes. And I just thought, now that sounds like a lot, like that sounds like a fun career. And so look, this was the early 90s in Miami. There weren't quite as many multinationals as there are now. But what I say to people is whenever you have sort of that aspiration, dream, goal, plan, what have you, you tell everybody about it, because you never know when that opportunity might come up. And in my case, that was exactly the case. And I stepped into a financial analyst role at American Express in Latin America, and rose to the finance ranks, shifted to the business, which I know we're going to talk about, so I'll go really fast. Shifted to the business side, to own my own the P&L itself, which was a very significant shift from what I say, like analyzing the variances in a P&L to actually owning the P&L and being much more of a growth strategist than a financial analyst. And I managed a nice sized business in Latin America until I took on a global role at American Express, right before the global financial crisis of 2008, which created a catalyst for me to reconsider my career, because I would have to relocate to New York, and I wasn't going to leave Miami. So that then created an opportunity for me to do a little bit of what you guys are doing, actually stepping into the world of entrepreneurship, and as well as identifying potential investment opportunities. And so that was, I will say, while it may have been a really difficult time, because it was the financial crisis, the financial industry, of course, had been upended quite significantly. It was actually at a personal level a really fun time to get to know myself and what I really enjoyed and what I was good at. And I went back to corporate because I couldn't do it. And I have the utmost respect for entrepreneurs. My dad, as I said, my father was one, and I just thought, I don't think this is right for me. But I looked at a number of different investment opportunities in the payment space, and I stayed very close to that. And then that actually helped me pivot into MasterCard, um, as the head of Latin America for products, marketing, and what we call MasterCard Advisors at that time, which is a consulting business. And then from then I went on to take a global role, leading the, I've almost lost the title of it, loyalty and marketing services, president of that business, which is a global P&L, about $2 billion, roughly. And, should I continue or are you going to
Yeah,
ask me
no, I
questions?
like
Yeah,
it.
keep going.
No,
Okay.
keep going.
You know, it's very difficult to speak 35 years in a very short period of time. But after I took on that global role, I aspired to join public boards and started the due diligence. I know we are going to talk a little bit about that. And had the great opportunity to join two great public boards, one Equitable Holdings out of New York and Bath and Body Works out of Columbus, Ohio. And then recently, I just joined the private board of Abra, the Abra Group, which is the parent company of Avianca and Gol Airlines in Latin America. And then I sit in a few advisory, boards, specifically targeting education and talent development, which is really my passion. And so I had the talent and comp committee at Bath and Body Works, which has been a lot of fun.
That sounds great. And I want to come back to the board service part, but I think that there are some lessons in your career. And again, I know that, you were looking for something that was more invigorating than, banking, although banking can be a lot of fun and a lot
Very
of
much
us have our start and our careers there. Uh, but what was it that you thought was appealing? You could have stayed in as a CFO, right? That's how you broke into the brands.
Yeah.
But why didn't you follow that path? And what was what were the dynamics that led to the shift to owning your P&L?
Yeah. So when I joined American Express, I had an opportunity to not only be the CFO of a specific business unit, but be the regional CFO as well in business planning. And so I had a really deep understanding of how the business ran, what the real opportunities for growth, where we were falling short. And there was this one business that it was just floundering. Yet I was so confident that it had such a terrific runway ahead of it that for me, I'm a growth minded person. Like that's just my nature. I'm optimistic and I believe that to look for opportunities. And so naively or not, I said, I can do this. I can make this shift from finance into the general manager role. I'll lean in hard on my financial skills. But you know what? I'm going to lean in hard on a ton of relationships that I've built over the several years as the CFO with the marketing teams, the operations teams, the technology teams, et cetera, and go for it. And I wanted to stretch myself. I just constantly look for those opportunities to get a little bit uncomfortable, and stretch and step into a new leadership responsibility, which had me in my 30s. I was about 31, 32, stepping into a general management role, leading much more senior people than I was. So I just found that to be really enticing and interesting to take that on, and not without obviously its risks.
Yeah.
And its challenges, right? Because I faced some challenges, but all in all, it was one of the most important pivotal moves of my career, shifting from finance to owning the business, because at that point, then a whole other slew of opportunities opened up.
Sure, different businesses,
Different
larger
larger
businesses.
business, absolutely.
A couple of
Marketing,
things. One about the challenges. Well, one that you referred to is you weren't leaving Miami,
right.
but even in your board work, you're traveling quite a bit.
Yeah.
You mentioned the Bianca joint venture, and that meets in London. So none of these positions required resettling in any particular place other than Miami?
In Miami. Well, the Latin America roles at both Amex and MasterCard, because the headquarters are in Miami, didn't require me to move per se. I was on a plane a lot. When I took on the global role at MasterCard, it was one of the conditions for me to take the job. And the great thing about MasterCard, and this was, I'm talking to you about 2014, 15, so it was
Mhm.
10 years ago, where it wasn't so common, this flexibility that we, enjoy today. I was in a regional role and they were offering me a global position, which I didn't think was the right job.
Oh,
And I said, I'd love for you to consider, instead of the job being defined that way, why don't we think about the job this way, which I think, number one, creates more value for the company and it really plays to my personal strengths. And I think I can help you all be much more successful. But there's one condition. I can't leave Miami. Okay. My heels are deep in the sand in Miami Beach. Okay. And I give Ajay Banga full credit because it was really Ajay and at that time Gary Flood, who was a global head of products, who I reported to, full credit because they didn't blink. They didn't blink. They just said, look, we need the energy, we need the experience. And they were in the midst of transformation. Amex being a B2C company, MasterCard being a B2B2C, some elements of B2C, but primarily, Ajay was very focused on bringing the consumer much more into the conversation. And so, I spent 17 years at American Express. So that felt like this is a good bet to make.
yeah.
And I'm forever grateful because managing, having a global, remit, again, global P&L out of Miami, it was tough. I traveled quite a bit. Like, it sounds very sexy, but I would go to Sydney for 2 days and be like on a plane for a day, be there 2 days, come back another day. It's like, oh my God. Like the thought of that now is just exhausting to me. There's the thought of
It's
it's exhausting.
It is exhausting. And
I love traveling, but yeah.
but was one of the reasons your commitment to Miami, was that for family reasons?
Yeah.
Was that,
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
that-
totally family reasons. When early in my career, my parents were alive, my husband's parents. And so we just had our roots here, our friends, our family. And it just never felt that it would be so significantly rewarding versus what we felt we were giving up.
Mhm.
The trade-off just didn't seem like it was going to be there.
Yeah.
And admittedly, my husband, and he would say this too, he the thought of uprooting to really and our kids, our family, was just not appealing.
Yeah.
Know,
Well, but it's one of the hurdles
it's a
that
big hurdle.
women face.
Yeah.
Particularly earlier in the career, but I think all along.
All
'Cause,
along.
we're the caretaker
All along.
of the
Yes.
Latino family.
Yes.
And so the fact that you could navigate that and just make it a condition is, whoa, incredible.
Yeah.
That the skills were recognized at
Yeah.
such a level that, okay, we'll accede to that. It's great. And it's just goes to show to the strength of your preparation and ability to manage. But, that's one hurdle. But I know that you were breaking barriers all along. I mean, women were not being given P&Ls.
Yeah.
Um, you took it, you moved it up, you moved it up. You had to have hit a number of barriers along the way. Can
Yeah.
you talk a little bit about those and how you maneuvered
Navigate.
around them?
Yeah. First, and I think first and foremost, in Latin America at the time as well, in banking and financial services, there weren't that many women in leadership positions. In the sort of from a US standpoint. In Latin America, surprisingly, in Colombia and Panama, those two markets specifically really developed talent quite extensively in financial services. So it was actually really wonderful to see. So the barriers that I faced were much more with my age than anything else, because I was the youngest executive at the table, right? I was like in my 30s. And I felt that I didn't have the same level of experience as, the head of Mexico, the head of Brazil, the head of Argentina. Like these were individuals who had been in the sector for a long time, very successful. And I didn't have the same track record in building businesses. What I had was a really deep understanding of how the business made money, because that's my skill set. And so I focused on what I always focus on, which is after I decide what it is that has to get done, like what's the goal here? What's the strategy? It's bringing the best team possible to the table. And so I absolutely always focus on identifying the absolute best and the brightest and bring the right team together. Like there's no way in the world to have done some of the things that I did throughout my career, which really looked a little bit impossible at times. Um, if I didn't have the team that I had. So I focused on, again, leaning in on my own personal strengths in finance, bringing really the best people I possibly could, and then developing relationships not only in Latin America, but in the headquarters.
Mhm.
And I did that extensively. Did I have to do it? Didn't have to do it to get my job done, but it made my job, I was much more effective in doing my job because we were very dependent as being, I managed Puerto Rico as one of the markets.
Mm.
And Puerto Rico in terms of financial, the financial services, it's effectively, the same regulations, the same consumer regulations. And so I was very dependent on where the US was going with their products because that eventually would affect me. So I started building relationships outside of the region to expand my network inside the company
Mhm.
because I really didn't have, I mean, I came into Amex not knowing anybody. So,
From
I
the
just
outside,
from the
right?
outside. And that eventually helped because I eventually took on a global role at Amex right before the crisis. So
But
I
then
just
you,
had connections everywhere. That's I mean, I'm a connector in general.
but you talked about being always the youngest in the room.
Yeah.
That's an interesting take. I mean, it's usually
Like not today.
yeah.
Not,
Well,
not today.
well, usually we've been the only woman in the room, certainly the only Latina in the
Yeah.
room, or the
Yeah.
only person of color in the room, whatever. But the youngest, interesting.
Yeah.
And I just am thinking about it in terms of putting the team together.
Mhm.
And there I am, a seasoned executive, and now you're asking me to join your team
Mhm.
and, in a senior position, but junior to you and,
Mhm.
maybe a few layers.
Yeah.
How did you get that buy-in from key senior people
Yeah.
that you
Yeah.
needed? Because
Yeah.
you knew
A
that to be
100%.
a weakness.
It was so hard. It was really hard. I have to be honest. It was like it was not the funnest time in my career. I have to admit. And it was hard and building that credibility.
Yeah.
Again, I think foundational in business, you build credibility by delivering on your commitments and the results, and then everybody sort of follows and says, "Oh, that's exciting. I want to be part of that winning train."
Mhm.
And so part of it was in parallel, really, first, really having clarity in terms of where this business needed to go, define it, articulate it, and get organized behind it, and have clarity what role everybody played to get us there. Like I love every year to set headlines for the team. I said, where do we want to be at the end of the year in 3 years? Like I just love to inspire. And so I wanted to make sure that everybody saw the opportunity for them to be part of something and that they can contribute to something and that I needed them. Like you have to have humility. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. I didn't have the experience, but I had really deep knowledge in certain areas. And then I did a really good job bringing really great people, together direct. Cause I managed in a matrix organization, which is really the worst of the worst at that time. We're talking 30 years ago now. And so my direct team, I had direct authority. But then I managed a cross-functional executive team, which is where a lot of the seasoned executives were part of.
Right.
So leading and influencing without direct authority was
It's
something
really, it's tough in the
oh,
best of
it's
cases.
tough in the best of cases. So,
Yeah.
it's building relationships ultimately, I think, the trust, I mean, really that teamwork, you have to invest in it. And I spent quite a lot of, time
Yeah.
investing.
Well, those are great insights. But as you built those businesses, and they were turnarounds in
Yeah.
some cases,
Yeah.
and so they received visibility to the
Yes.
point that it got you buy-in from corporate headquarters.
Yep.
When did you start interacting with the board?
Yeah, with the board of directors of Amex, as a general manager, we and in Latin America, it wasn't, a frequent interaction with the corporate board because Amex is a big multinational company, of course. But we had the opportunity. I had the opportunity. And one of my favorite stories, which I often forget, but now that you ask me, I remember, is having lunch with Henry Kissinger, which
Ah,
was an
he
I
was an
mean,
advisor.
he was on the board.
Oh,
He was actually on our board. And that was a lot of people don't know who Henry Kissinger is, but he's now passed away, but he was the secretary of
no, he was
oh my God.
same as Rubio. He was
Yes.
the
Se-
foreign secretary in other countries.
Secretary of State.
State.
Secretary of State. Very wise. And that was just such an experience, to be there with such a historical figure. So that was a lot of fun. At MasterCard, I had multiple opportunities to interact with the board. And I had some good experiences and I had some really bad experiences. And it was out of one really bad experience that I talk about. I just gave a lecture this week at FIU, and I call that experience the big fail, because I had not up until that point really felt like I had stumbled upon anything significant in my career. Tough, but you keep going, and it was going it was going fine. And I had this board meeting in Sydney, Australia. I had just taken on my global role, and the business itself. I'm very attracted to businesses that need love,
Yeah,
okay?
attention.
Investments, talent. And so it was definitely a turnaround of business as well. And I had just stepped into the role, and about 6 months later, I think they wanted me to present to the board. And I had not met the board yet of MasterCard. And it wasn't my best performance. Okay. It was I over prepared, I under delivered, those situations. And it was a really important moment for me because I had just stepped into a global leadership role, which it's a big deal. Like, that's a big deal role. And I just crashed. And so it was that moment where you ask yourself, where do I go from here? Do I just, cave in? I mean, do I just hide? Do I go? Where do I go? Or, do I let it define me? Or do I take this opportunity to step into it and do what I've always done, which is set the strategy, deliver, bring the best team, and just focus on execution.
Execute.
And that's what I did. So I did that. And so I did have experience with the board. And it was a really good experience for me, actually, to also, as I thought about board opportunities, to see the dynamics that the board has with the leadership team, and the importance of having the management team feel and understand that the board ultimately is the boss, and they're there obviously to support the strategy, et cetera. But it shouldn't be a threatening situation to go into the board. Like, that is not what your board wants. And that's what I kind of felt like. I felt like I was being tested.
Huh.
And that's not healthy. Like, that's not a health. So, as I sit on the board now, like, I'm very welcoming. I mean, I ask tough questions. But I want people to feel like they're valued. They're coming in and they're running a great business. Like, you're doing the tough stuff. I'm sitting here asking the questions.
But I guess I'm a little confused. You walked into it. It wasn't a good meeting. For,
Yeah.
Whatever reason.
Yep.
And I've been in those, but yet you still pursued board service.
Absolutely.
Tell me how.
Yeah.
How that.
Yeah.
Why didn't you get turned off? We had someone. We were here. We listened.
Oh, yeah.
Someone that presented and said they have no interest in the quarterly thing and all.
No,
that.
I wanted to pursue board service somewhere halfway through my global, P&L responsibility. As I thought about, I'm a planner. Like, I always think about what's next, not in titles, not in money. I just think about where can I drive and make more impact. Like, that's just my general philosophy. And so in the global role, as I thought about what is next here within MasterCard, to be very sincere, I had, I think, the best job. Other than I didn't get all the investments I wanted all the time, which was really tough, and people didn't understand the business that well sometimes. But outside of that, I loved what I did. And so I thought to myself, what else would I do that I would love this much? And I said, I think it's time for me then to sort of take the talents, experience, et cetera, to other industries. And board service seemed to be the right place to do that. And And so I could still, again, be involved in advice on strategy, which I absolutely love, engage in talent, CEO succession. I've been to a couple already in a very short time in one of my boards. And again, bring some insights to help the leadership team along the journey of what they were doing. And listen, along the journey,
Yeah.
learn, build new networks, absolutely get in a completely different zone, because you're not in you're not in execution, you're not an operator, you are an advisor. That, to me, that was the hardest pivot that I had to go through, because I'm used to running businesses. And so,
Yep, yep, yep.
it was like, get out of here. And I would self edit. I trust me.
Hands
It was,
out.
hands out, nose in,
No
hands out.
nose in,
Yeah.
hands out.
And so, yeah, so I thought it would be an advantage for companies to hire me, because I had a great mix of financial skills and acumen. So I sit on audit committees. I obviously run a P&L, so I have the general management responsibilities. I have an international global experience. And so at the minimum, those three elements combined add a tremendous value to any company. And then for me, it was just, again, enjoying new
Oh,
environments.
yeah. There's no question. And that's what's so exciting
I
about
love it personally.
Angeles.
Yes.
We're always learning, and there's going to be a pitch later on, three or four, I'm not sure how many we have, but new industries,
Yeah.
young people.
Yeah.
I mean, the energy
Yeah, the
is
energy.
just, I understand exactly.
I love it.
I wanted to ask a minute because it was raised, I think it was, Pacheco raised this about, our community as consumers versus investors. And you have sat in financial companies where our strength as consumers is very important, the credit
Yep.
cards. And then now you're on the Equitable board.
Yeah.
Which is a different type of consumption that leads to savings and
Yeah.
wealth development.
Yeah.
Can you
Yeah.
comment on
Yeah.
that difference and where we as a community
Yeah.
sit and where we
As
should?
women or as
No, as Latinos.
Latinos. Okay. Yeah. I mean, look, I think you have to follow, you're in business, and these are growth sectors. You have to follow the money, and the money, it absolutely sits in the hands of, a lot of, first of all, women in particular, either manage or influence the way the household budgets get spent. And so it's important to understand the sector and address it. And then Latinos, and it depends what article you read, has between $2 and $3 trillion of impact in the economy. So that's a very positive, that's a very positive outlook for any company looking to acquire new consumers. I can tell you, both boards, both Bath and Body Works and Equitable, as we talk about the next click of growth, you have to consider the Hispanic community. You have to consider, obviously, the younger generations. Like, there's no doubt about, like, entering certain new markets is absolutely required if you want to have a multiple of growth. That there's no doubt about it. So both of these companies are in that journey, which is exciting, because I can tell you, being a voice in that boardroom about understanding this consumer, and really getting the buy-in, because the numbers are the numbers. That's the great thing about this, right? The numbers are the numbers. So any good old-fashioned, marketing strategy understands who my product is intended to attract, and how can I attract them? How do I reach them? What channels do I reach them? And so those conversations around, how do I reach Latinos? What brands should I partner with that already have Latino consumers? And that, 1 + 1 is 3, that I can partner with them. And so it's very visible right now. It's a very active opportunity, quite honestly. I think it's very exciting.
Yeah, no, it is. And I'm a big fan of
And small
insurance.
business, by the way.
Oh, yeah.
And
of
small
course.
business. And small business on the insurance side is big. And education, one of the things that's very important for our community is the education on financial planning and wealth management. Right. So I'm sure you guys have talked about that. And retirement services in particular, which is Equitable's core business, in addition to wealth management, is about, look, you've worked really hard. you want to retire with dignity. You want to retire with having, enough to enjoy that next
Exactly.
chapter. And so
Exactly.
start now.
Sure.
And insurance, life insurance,
Is
like
a
for the
key-
inevitable, it's
It's a
critical.
key part.
So we have to continue to do more on the education side, especially I think to the underrepresented communities. And that definitely is an area of opportunity.
I couldn't be in greater agreement. Widowed 30 years ago, and insurance was a
Insurance.
key
Yeah.
part of making that transition to being the sole parent of 3 young kids so much easier.
Yes.
But I want to give others a
Okay.
chance to
Sure.
ask you questions, because everything in your background, and it's so interesting. And okay, Jorge, you're first. Jorge just wrote a book, and he's a tech
Oh, okay.
guru.
I'm going a quiz about my, no, I'm just kidding.
Pressure.
So you didn't say this, but
Okay.
one of the things that I've observed with a lot of young entrepreneurs, women entrepreneurs, is the terrible thing called imposter syndrome.
Mm-hmm.
You didn't say that you had it, but it sounded like you had it for about a microsecond and you overcame it. So what advice would you have for people who are experiencing that to overcome imposter syndrome? Because it could be paralyzing.
It 100% can. And I'm glad you brought it up because I usually do talk about it. I talked about it Wednesday with the students. At every stage, at every really critical stage in my career, I absolutely had imposter syndrome. Whether it was from finance to GM to global, at MasterCard, I will tell you, one of the reasons I almost did not take the job was because I wasn't sure that I was ready to sit in a role one step removed from the CEO, right? And so it's a constant. And the tactic that I've learned that I still use it today, because I had it on my boards and it's a new board, is when I was in transition between the two corporate jobs, and I said I was a little bit of an entrepreneur there, I had an entrepreneurial stint, I came across a book called Strengths Finder 2.0. And so I was very close to the dean of the College of Business, and she suggested I read this book. And what it is, it really helps you get to know your strengths. It's like really that simple. And the intention is for you to start developing greater confidence as you understand your strengths and you lean into things that obviously tap into those strengths. So as I was evaluating this opportunity, specifically with MasterCard, I thought, you know what? I don't have A and B, but you know what I really do have, which is very unique. I do have this background in a company like Amex, which at that time was not dwarfing, but it was a large company relative to MasterCard at that time that had just IPO'd. And I said, I've worked in a highly matrix organization. I've led big teams around the world. I understand the consumer business and I'm a finance person. Like I get it. So I may not have, again, some of the other elements, but that's what I have. And I'm going to lean in hard with that. And that's little by little, that's how I start thinking about it. And I also bring people around me. And I know everyone talks about having a board of directors. And many of you, I'm sure, have that because it's really important to have people around you who are truth tellers, who can really help you in looking at different situations in different ways. They have your best interest in mind, but they're going to be honest. And so I had a lot of people around me that, started with my husband, who's my number one cheerleader, but I would say it's a little biased, my mother, my dad too. But I would have people around me who I felt were so competent, so smart, and that they were going to be really honest about what I could do and where I needed to work. And so the combination of me getting to know more of me and bringing people who would help me think about things in a different way, that's how I have overcome it over the years.
Again, the team. It's not
100%.
just you.
It's the team.
And recognizing that's really
Absolutely.
sharing
Yeah.
the effort.
Absolutely.
So it's never
100%.
one person.
Never
We
one
have
person.
time for one more? No? Okay. All right. Well, I want to thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Great story. Really appreciate it.